Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android. Recommend Spotify or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Lots of draft stuff on there. Check out the host updates. We've also got channels, for transactions, promo deals, and more. Check it out, Off the Floor. Link is right here in the description on the podcast feed and on the YouTube channel. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network, includes our friends Nelson and his family and his entire team over at c-armandstaffing.com. That's c-armandstaffing.com. For a price estimate, give Nelson a call at 561-891-9620. That's 561-891-9620. Why check out mobile C-Arm staffing services? Well, if you work in a hospital, work in a doctor's office, you sometimes may need the x-ray equipment and staffing brought to you. That's what these good folks do. Again, give them a call at 561-891-9620. That's mobile C-Arm and Staffing Services, or c-armandstaffing.com. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Greg Sylvander. And Brady Hawk, you can follow at Brady Hawk 305. Okay, so we're getting close to doing a lot of draft coverage. We're going to do some draft retrospectives on prior Heat drafts, like, say, 2003, 2008, 2015, 2017, 2019, like some of the ones that will stick in your head for players that they took. Some of those we're going to do here on Five on the Floor, and some of them we're going to do at Playback. So make sure you download the Playback app. There we'll do one with the highlights. We'll have our team over there, Matt Hannafin, Eternal, and, of course, Adele, who's been helping us with a lot of this draft stuff of late. He's going to be appearing here as well. So we'll be splitting those up. We've got about 10 different years that we want to look at, so maybe we'll do 5 and 5, and then we're going to be getting you ready for the draft specifically as we go forward. But there are reports that come out, so we're going to address reports, even if some of them don't end up turning to be true, and in some cases, information is put out there because you're trying to spin one side or another, or whoever is revealing the information, whether it's an agent, a GM, a scout, whatever it may be, has an angle of some sort. But there was a report today from Sam Amico that the Heat and the Lakers, and Sam Amico is based out of Cleveland. Again, there's Sam Amick, there's Sam Amico, they're different reporters. We've referred to some Sam Amico reports before, and we've had him here on the show. He said that the Lakers and the Heat are trying, or maybe trying, right? Or could be trying, it was somewhat speculative, to get into the top 5. So again, this is not like a straight report. The Heat are trying to get into the top 5, but it's weird. Okay? Because the Heat don't do that, Greg. Right? They don't trade into the top 5. In fact, I've heard of very few instances where they even tried. I remember
once. I can remember once that they tried.
I know. I think it's the same one. Which one is it in your memory?
Lamar Odom.
Yes, that's right.
That's the big trade up. And I thought to myself, is there a Lamar Odom in this draft? And not exactly like a player comp. That's not where I was going. But is there that kind of like talented upside at the top of the draft that they would go and make this move? I think some of it could be a little bit that Devin Carter is rising up in most mock drafts and looking like a top 10 prospect. And at one point there were, kind of aspirations of having him land at 15. And I don't think that that's realistic. And then there's this other there's an anticipation that the Heat are going to consolidate and maybe move Tyler Hero. And I think that those are just the dot connection that's happening right now versus it actually being reality.
It's interesting you remember the Lamar Odom one because, excuse me, I do too. But they actually, I believe, and maybe someone from the Heat will correct me on this, but I remember being at the SunTrust building before they moved everything to American Airlines Arena and sitting next to Barry, since that's how old we both are. And we had heard reports that they were trying to get up and take Darius Miles, who is just like Lamar Odom, a player the Clippers ended up taking with that like really young team with Quentin Richardson and Keon Dooling and others that really didn't materialize into much. So they did do it one other time. It seemed like the piece they were dangling those days was PJ Brown a lot, and then they ultimately moved PJ in the year 2000 in the Big Eddie Jones deal. But Brady, let's go to this, okay? Because again, this is not characteristic for the Heat to trade into the top 5. I don't think it's happening. This is not. But okay, before I say it, is this the draft to trade into the top 5?
No, that's kind of the main piece here. Is like I said before the show even started to Greg, I was like, if there was a draft where we were having this conversation where it was like, okay, jump into the top 5 and try to land a top talent. This doesn't feel like the one, just because it doesn't feel like there's a big talent difference from 1 to probably 15 in their range. And here's the biggest thing. Go on the internet. Look at every mock draft you have available. None of them are even almost the same. Like everybody, like there could be somebody's top 3 pick that are barely at the end of the lottery in another draft.
So
a mock draft. So it's like, you don't know what to expect on draft night. That's saying you're going to jump in the top 5 to get this certain guy. There's a good chance you might get the guy you want staying still. Like, so I think that's kind of the main thing here. But jumping into the top 5, just feel like the only thing I could think of is it like the idea of maybe having that asset, like getting into the top 5 to saying, okay, we have a top 5 pick to be traded for some of these guys that we're talking about in terms of like Donovan Mitchell's, if he doesn't get the extension or this and that. Like if they have a top 5 pick in their hands, like, okay, we can move that. That's the only thing I could think of, because from a draft perspective, I just don't think it makes much sense.
Well, that's the thing. Like, okay, beyond just is there a player that you want, but what would the Heat even move? Like, that's my thing here. Like,
I have a scenario. Can I throw it out there?
Ahead. Yes, absolutely.
Let's say that they're worried about payroll, and you want to kind of reset and take Tyler's big salary and exchange it for Reed Shepherd's rookie contract, and you think that they're favorable shooters. Is that a scenario? I mean, I'm trying to come up with
the team do that though. That's my thing. Like we've talked about, okay, can Tyler fetch you a first-round pick, right? Like last year we believed he could. Now we don't know, but then it's like he's going to fetch you a top 5 pick. Right? That's you know what I'm saying? Like that's. I mean, Bam would fetch you a top 5 pick if a team could afford him, but you're not doing that. And that's, see, to me, that's what this comes down to. Like, I know this is not a good draft. It's still a top 5 pick and a cross-controlled contract. Like, those have value to teams. And also, the other thing that happens here during the draft process, and sometimes it ends up being wrong, and you end up with a draft that's led by Anthony Bennett. But teams fall in love with players during the draft process, right? So we always hear it's a bad draft, it's a bad draft, it's a bad draft. Like another one is a great draft. You know what draft we heard was a great draft? The Wiggins draft. The Wiggins-Jabari Parker draft. I mean, Wiggins has been basically a glorified role player. Jabari Parker's been out of the league. You know what I'm saying? So like sometimes we hear that stuff, and then there are other drafts where it's like it doesn't look real good, and then teams start to work out particular players, and they see themselves, drafting that player and what that player is going to look like for them. And their entire perspective changes. So Brady, I mean, I'll go to you. I mean, what would the Heat? What would they even move? Like Caleb's a free agent. Haywood's a free agent. Like what?
I guess to Greg's point, it's Tyler, and I guess that 15th pick, and maybe you attach a second round, maybe their second round pick, because they never seem to make second round picks anyway. They're new to this over the last few years since they got Jay Rich.
I
don't know. Like that's the key here, and also. I was looking at the teams, like which team would be willing to jump back. Like you have Detroit at 5, you have San Antonio at 4, you have Houston at 3, you have Washington at 2, and you have Atlanta at 1. And you would say maybe Atlanta, but you're not getting the first pick, right? Like that's probably the most realistic team that you can see jumping back. Maybe.
Well, I'll challenge you a little on that. I think there are a couple teams in that mix that probably could benefit from getting a young veteran. Because Houston and maybe even Detroit. I kind of feel like, I mean, Houston has been moving that direction, but it does feel like Detroit is finally ready to actually pivot and, not just stack picks upon picks upon picks. I mean, this gets back to what I was talking about with the Clippers way back in the day where they had all these young players. And they did it again before, Greg, way back, like the Danny Manning, Ken Norman, all these guys. See, it used to be, Brady, before you were born, okay? I always throw back on this. Happy 21st, by the way. But it used to be that we saw all these players in college, like for 4 years, right? And so like Danny Manning came out and it was like, oh my God, it's Danny Manning. Danny Manning these days as a collegian, like he would have come out like Beasley did after the first year, right? Like he wouldn't have stayed for 4 years. So we, unlike this draft where it's like literally I'm like catching up now, like to know anything about any of these guys. I knew everything about those guys back then. And like the Clippers kept stacking during those years, like players of the year, like Reggie Williams from Georgetown and Kenny Norman from Illinois and all these guys. And like, it just never worked out. They just kept rolling through these young players with no veterans. And it does feel like Detroit's done a little of that. Whereas Orlando and now Houston have kind of tried to supplement their picks. Orlando's just picked better, but they've tried to supplement their picks with other guys. And so I could see teams maybe saying, okay, we can get a 24-year-old who can average 20 in this league.
Mm-hmm.
That might be interesting to them as opposed to having to develop another guy. But then, Greg, you said like someone like Reed Shepherd. Okay, if Reed Shepherd's going to end up doing Tyler Hero-like things, like why pay for Tyler Hero? Well, he's getting paid if you could pay for Reed Shepherd, right? Like that's so I can see it.
That's if Reed Shepherd lands at 5. He could go earlier.
Correct. Okay, so that's the thing. Like I can see it from the Heat's perspective, but I agree with you, Brady. I have a hard time really totally seeing it from the other perspective. I'm trying to talk myself into this. It's hard to really evaluate it that way. All right, on the other side of this break, we'll talk about maybe it makes sense to trade up a little. Maybe not to 5, but is there a player kind of in that mix? We talk about a lot of these guys are the same. Is there a player that makes so much sense for the Heat that maybe it's worth flipping a future second or something else along those lines to move up? Before we do, want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Our friends over at Prize Picks is still legal in the state of Florida. We do know that something happened with the Supreme Court today, and a certain entity down here like is controlling gambling for the next 300 years. This will not affect Prize Picks. They've already changed their game to accommodate for the state of Florida. So you can use the code 5 FIVE and get that initial deposit matched up to $100, just like you did yesterday. And we do recommend playing this because it's kind of fun. I mean, they've got the lineup. It's really easy now, and they still have a lot of the formatting that they had before. But again, without the flex plays and stuff like that, you know what you're getting with the power play, and you can win a lot of money. So check it out. Use Prize Picks. Download the app. Go to prizepicks.com. Use the code 5 FIVE. All right, Brady, I'll go to you first on this. Is there any player that is such a good fit for the Heat of all these players that are virtually the same in terms of talent level that, like, if you saw this guy at 13, you'd say on draft night, you'd be like, okay, do something and just get up and get him?
I think Devin Carter is the easiest example of that, just because he fits what they do, just because of the natural connection, the fit to their program. But I don't even see it the way things are looking like. I don't even see him falling to 13. So 100%, like in that specific example, like if you are sitting there and the guy's dropping like that, I think you do probably try and see if you could work your way up. And I know there's been reports out there. I think it was Anthony Chang that wrote some stuff about Spo kind of being more into this kind of situation with the draft. He's never in this. He's usually coaching right now. He's not a guy looking into draft guys, and he's not going to get in the way of them. But I just thought it was interesting because if he even does have a little of input, it feels like guys like Devin Carter, he would be like the guys nudging the guy next to him, saying, "Hey, if he does begin to drop, maybe jump up to get this guy." I'm looking at some of the teams in that range that they could maybe trade with. The one that pops for me is if let's just go really high, let's say 8, San Antonio, just because they have 2 picks in that top 10. And if you're getting a young guy, why not? To your example, Ethan, when you said kind of getting a veteran on one of these teams, jumping in and trying to, San Antonio already got their rookie and you try to get somebody else. San Antonio could be a team, I guess. Don't think you're getting 7 because I don't think they're going to call Portland. I think that one might be I think that one might be ruled out. But I think Devin Carter's one, but this is the reason I think I really do believe, if anything, they just stay at 15, just because any of these guys we're discussing could fall to 15. Like, they're legitimately top 7, top 5 guys that could fall to them just because everything feels like it's out of place. Like, we did a playback recently where Nikola Topic, who was like a top 3, top 2 pick at certain points. I've seen plenty of mock drafts recently where they're projecting him to literally get drafted by Miami at 15. So, like, I think if there's any situation for them to stay put, which they always like to do because they always like to see what they can kind of outsmart these other teams and see what falls into their lap in a way, I think they do probably stay put. But that's the top 5 thing just seems kind of crazy just because of this specific draft. The more I think about it.
Yeah, and Greg, I think when we get to draft night, we may end up in this situation that happens a lot, which is that we're all worried about not getting a guy, and then there are 4 guys there that we talked about, and then Heat fans are going to be angry about the 3 that they didn't pick, typically, because the Heat may not pick any of the 4 of them. More likely, they'll pick somebody that fits their system better, that they fell in love with, sort of like they did with Jaquez, right? Like, that feels like where we're headed, actually. I just think that's much more likely. And by the way, I don't think they'll trade down either.
No,
I think you're right, Brady, right?
I think that they stay where they are. And I think, to Brady's point, though, but Devin Carter is shooting up mock drafts. But maybe every mock draft's going to be wrong. Because I think if ever there was going to be a year where all these people would fall flat on their face with their predictions, it's probably in this draft where this talent gap is not substantial at the top. So you just may have a big board that has variance to all the other big boards that the professionals have. And you'll see how that plays out on draft night. To your point about having like 4 players that you didn't think would even be there are there all of a sudden or something like that. And you're choosing between them. At this point, if you can move up for like, if Carter were to be there at 13, you should do what's necessary. If Stephon Castle were to drop for some reason, I don't see that happening. I think you lean into that. But otherwise, there's probably not a ton that you're going to do to move up.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. And I think that, again, as we get closer to the draft, we're going to start evaluating some of these guys specifically, and we're going to get into the bigs and the smalls and the wings and all of that. And I think we have to take into context who may not be here next year. I think that, finding a replacement for Caleb Martin, I think, is probably the direction that this goes. We keep talking about functional size, so that's something to look at. I do not think, we did the Zach Edey episode, I do not think that they're taking a 7'5" guy to play next to Bam. I've been wrong before, but does not seem like an Erik Spoelstra maneuver. But the other thing about this is, look, Adam Simon, obviously, is kind of in charge of this part, right? Chet Kamara has a big voice. Their scouts have a voice. But the Spoelstra thing is interesting because you're right, he has not had this kind of time before, and he's talked about it. And so I do think his fingerprints are going to be on this to a certain degree. And so I think then you have to say, okay, there are certain types of players. If he doesn't think he's going to play the player, they're not going to take the player. Okay. And that's even with, Pat Riley's predilection for certain types of players. I think there's going to be a lean on Spo in this thing. I did hear today, and someone else, I can tell you, our Brian Fonseca heard this today. They love Devin Carter. Like, it's pretty clear on this, right? We've all heard that. They also we've talked about this, really like the kid from Cal. And we worked him out recently, right? Tyson. So, just because they work someone out doesn't necessarily mean something. We'll get into that as we get close to the draft, but we've heard a lot of noise on him, and then we heard about the workout. So, and he's a player that you probably do not need to move up to take. In fact, he's projected to go later than them. So that may be a thing where he may be the guy, and then we'll point back to this episode. He may be the guy. There's 4 other guys on the board, right? The Cam Whitmores, right? And then all of a sudden they take Tyson. Everybody's like, he was supposed to go 26. They don't give a damn. I just want to make that clear, right, Greg?
That's like Brady's Tyler Smith example. Like, maybe they just go with the guy that they like.
Or Tyson's an example of, like, they keep their pick of 15, don't take him, and then they use 43 to trade up to, like, top of the second round and then grab Tyson who drops. Like that, if there was a scenario of them trading up, I could see them doing that more than the 15 trade.
I could also see them selling their second round because we've seen them do that before. So, I mean, I think it could go in any direction. All right. We'll have more on this as we go forward. I think we're talking about going chronological, which would mean we probably I don't really see a need to do the pre-Riley drafts, to be honest.
Agree.
Right? Okay, we just made that decision. We could do them on playback. Maybe we'll do the Rice, Cyclee. For the old heads, we'll bring them over there. So probably we'll start with 2003. 2002 is another place we could look at. Obviously, the Caron Butler draft. Maybe we do that one on playback as well. But 2008 is the one I'm interested in. Honestly, that's the fascinating one to me because this organization that could have gone a totally different direction over the next couple of years if they drafted somebody other than Beasley at 2. Not that Beasley was considered the wrong pick at the time. He wasn't. But as I talked to Kevin Love about, what if they had taken Kevin Love? Maybe the big 3 don't become the big 3 2 years later. So we'll get into a whole bunch of stuff related to that. Thanks to Brady. Thanks to Greg. We will be on playback as long as the NBA Finals are going. What's the score of that game right now as we're recording this? Does anybody know? I paid so little attention to the finals. I got to be honest.
48-39. Boston is up.
Okay. So I'll pay even less attention to it now. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.